I'm Edith Winters, 67 years old, and for the last 5 of those years, I've lived alone in the house my husband Walter and I bought almost 30 years ago. It's the kind of place where every picture on the wall tells a story, where every creak in the floorboards has a memory tied to it. When Nathan was 12, he picked the biggest bedroom and claimed the backyard for a treehouse. Now that same yard sits quiet, the only movement coming from the wind in the oak branches. Sometimes when I look out the kitchen window, I can almost see him out there laughing, full of plans for the future. I never thought back then that I'd one day be sitting here asking myself how we grew so far apart before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been taken for granted by someone you love. I was born and raised in a small town in Virginia, where folks looked after each other and you never had to lock your door at night. My parents weren't wealthy, but they taught me the kind of values money couldn't buy. Be kind, work hard, and never turn your back on family. I carried those lessons with me into adulthood, married Walter at 24, and together, we built a good life. He worked in insurance. I taught 3rd grade. We weren't rich, but we were steady. We saved diligently, invested when we could, and raised our son with everything we had. When Walter passed unexpectedly in his sleep 5 years ago, I thought my world had ended. But then Nathan and Melissa stepped in. They helped with the funeral arrangements, brought the kids around often, and for a while, it felt like we were closer than ever. Little Eli loved helping me bake. Claire used to sit at the table doing her homework while I told her stories about her grandpa. Those days gave me something to hold on to, something to feel useful again, but things began to shift, almost without me noticing. At first, the visits grew shorter, the calls less frequent. Nathan's voice started, sounding rushed, always somewhere else, always needing something. There were requests for help with Claire's school tuition, for Eli's medical mattress, for a new air conditioning unit they couldn't quite afford. And every time I gave, without hesitation. Because in my mind, that's what family did. And because deep down, I was afraid of what silence might come if I ever said no. Melissa's tone changed too. She dropped the kids off, like it was a favor to me. Not a shared joy. Like before, she once told me Claire needed to focus more on school and less on cookies and screen time. Her words were clipped, polite, but cold, like she was talking to a stranger at the end of a long grocery line. Not her children's grandmother. I kept quiet, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Maybe grief had made me too sensitive, but that feeling in my chest, that something was shifting, wouldn't go away. Then came the dinner invitation, out of the blue. Nathan suggested we meet up, just the two of us, at a cafe downtown. He sat there, nervous, spinning the salt shaker in his hand, before he finally said they were hoping to buy a house in Hillgrove, a high-end neighborhood known for its manicured lawns and marble countertops. I nodded, unsure where he was going, until he said, they were a bit short on the down payment. I said yes, before he could even finish, not just to help with the payment, but to buy the house outright in my name because their credit wasn't strong enough to qualify on their own. Maybe I thought it would bring us back together. Maybe I just wanted to feel like part of the picture again. When the housewarming party came, they introduced me to their friends, thanked me publicly. But it all felt oddly distant. Melissa beamed as she led a tour of the walk-in closet. Nathan poured wine for his co-workers. Claire barely looked up from her phone when she said, "Cool," after I reminded her who paid for the house. I smiled and nodded, but inside, something cracked just a little, and yet even then I didn't see it for what it was. Not fully, not until the night I stood outside their front door, blueberry pie in hand, lights on, laughter inside, and Tamsin opened the door. Not with warmth, but with surprise and subtle annoyance. Not even asking me in, That was when it began to really sink in. When the home I bought with my savings became a place. I wasn't welcome anymore. I hadn't expected much from Nathan's invitation to dinner that spring, but I said yes anyway. He sounded tired over the phone, distracted and cautious in that way I'd come to recognize. We met at a cafe just off Main Street, the same one where Walter used to pick up apple fritters on Sundays. Nathan was already seated when I arrived, tapping his thumb against the edge of the table, a glass of water in front of him untouched. He stood to greet me, gave me a quick hug, and gestured for me to sit. For a moment, neither of us said much. The clinking of dishes and low conversation around us filled the silence until he finally cleared his throat. "Melissa and I are planning a trip," he said, still avoiding my eyes. "Europe, France, Italy, maybe Switzerland, just for a couple weeks with the kids." I smiled and said that sounded lovely. Eli had always loved maps, and Claire was at the perfect age to appreciate a place like Florence. Nathan nodded, then hesitated. "The problem is, costs are going up. Flights, hotels. Everything's more expensive than we thought." I sipped my tea and waited. We could really use a little help. I asked how much they needed. He named a figure that wasn't impossible, but it wasn't small either. I didn't answer right away. Then I asked something I hadn't said aloud in years. Would there be room for me to come along? I said it lightly, almost like a joke, though I meant it. The idea of sharing that trip, seeing those places together, it stirred something hopeful in me. Nathan blinked, surprised. "Well, we kind of imagined it just being the four of us," he said slowly. "You know, a family thing." I looked at him, trying to catch his expression, but he glanced away again. "I am family," I said quietly. "Of course you are, Mom," he replied quickly, too quickly. "It's just that the kids really want something laid back, and Melissa, she's not sure it'd be relaxing for everyone." I nodded and looked down at my cup. He said he'd talk to her, see if something could be arranged. I already knew he wouldn't. 3 nights later, I was just about to head to bed when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, slid on my glasses, and read the message. "Mom, I'm sorry, but you won't be joining us on the trip. Melissa thinks you'll be a burden. I hope you understand. We're still counting on your help with the tickets." I stared at it for a long time. Read it again. Then again. The words didn't seem real at first. A burden. That's what I'd become in my son's eyes. Someone too inconvenient to include, but still necessary when money was needed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the same bed Walter and I had shared for decades, staring up at the ceiling as if it might offer an answer. When the sun came up, I made a pot of coffee and sat by the window, hoping for some clarity. None came. I thought of all the times I'd stepped in without question, helping with bills, school fees, vacations, even groceries. I'd said yes to every request, hoping it meant I'd still be included, hoping it would keep the ties strong. Maybe I was wrong to hope that. Later that day, the phone rang. It was Janine from my book club. "Edith," she said, concerned. "You didn't come yesterday. Everything okay? I hadn't even remembered we had a meeting." I apologized, and without meaning to, the whole story tumbled out about the text, the house, the slow unraveling of my place in their lives. There was a long pause when I finished. Then she said, "Edith, this isn't just about one message. You've told me before how they treat you. They didn't invite you to Christmas dinner, but they still asked you to help with gifts. They forgot your birthday, but remembered the next day when they needed new tires. You've been making excuses for years." I didn't answer right away. She was right. I had made excuses, over and over again. "What are you going to do?" she asked gently. "I don't know yet," I said. But I can't go on like this. That evening, I pulled out an old photo album and sat down at the kitchen table. I flipped through pages filled with birthdays and holidays, school plays and beach trips. Nathan as a toddler in overalls holding Walter's hand at the zoo. Claire on my lap covered in frosting from her third birthday cake. Eli in the backyard trying to chase butterflies. So many memories. I stopped at a photo taken at Walter's funeral. Nathan had his hand on my shoulder. He looked devastated. He looked like a son. I closed the album and sat there for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and tried calling Nathan. It rang until it went to voicemail. I tried again in the evening, and the call wouldn't go through. I checked the number twice. It was his. He was avoiding me. The next morning, I called Hugh Abbott, the family attorney who had handled our wills. I told him I needed to discuss a property matter. When we met at his office, he greeted me kindly, then asked what he could help with. I told him everything. That I had bought Nathan and Melissa's house in Hillgrove under my name. That it was paid for in full, that they lived there rent-free, and that I wanted to know what rights I had legally. Hugh listened without interruption. Then he opened the paperwork I'd brought. "The house is yours," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You paid in full, no mortgage, and you didn't sign a deed of gift or any transfer documents. They live there with your consent. If you withdraw that consent, you can reclaim the property, although there are some procedures to follow." I nodded slowly. "Could I sell it?" "Yes," he said. "And if you decide to do that, I'd advise doing it quietly, and without giving them advance notice. Otherwise, they might complicate things." I left his office and walked to the park. The trees were starting to bud, and families strolled by with strollers and dogs. I sat on a bench and watched ducks paddle in the pond. I thought about all the times Melissa had corrected me in front of the kids, all the missed calls, all the holidays I spent alone, all the times I told myself it was just a rough patch. I couldn't keep doing it, couldn't keep giving everything and asking for nothing. Couldn't keep pretending this was what family was supposed to feel like. I pulled out my phone and typed a short message. "We need to talk. It's important." I stared at it for a moment, then hit send. I didn't hear back from Nathan for 3 days. The message I sent, just 5 words, sat there unread for nearly a full day before the status finally changed. Still nothing. I tried calling once more just after lunchtime, but his number went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The following morning, I moved quietly through the house, folding laundry, wiping down the counters, watering the ferns on the back porch. Everything felt like a motion I'd done 1,000 times, but without any real sense of purpose. That afternoon, I took out a notepad and began making a list. Not groceries or errands, but all the expenses I'd quietly covered for Nathan's family over the years. School fees, summer camps, braces for Claire, the deposit for Melissa's business website, the car insurance. I stopped halfway down the page, my pen hovering. I heard the dryer buzz and went to fold towels. Later, I baked a small batch of sugar cookies, the kind Eli liked best, even though I knew he wouldn't be coming by. I let them cool on the counter untouched. That night, I sat by the window in the living room with the lights off. The oak tree outside swayed in the breeze, casting long shadows across the floor. I found myself listening to the quiet like it might tell me something. The only sound was the distant bark of a neighbor's dog and the soft creak of the settling house. The next day, I drove to the bank just after opening. The teller recognized me and waved me into a private office where I asked to speak with a financial advisor. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a young woman named Megan. I explained I wanted to cancel 2 recurring transfers, one to the landscaping service at Nathan's house and another to their in-home childcare provider. She raised an eyebrow, typing on her keyboard. "These have been active for quite some time," she said, double-checking the screen. I nodded and told her they were no longer needed. "And I'd also like to revoke the power of attorney I granted my son," I added. Megan looked up. "That'll need a notarized form, but we can prepare it today." "I'll wait," I said. While she stepped out to retrieve the paperwork, I took out my phone and opened the list again. I added 2 more entries and drew a line beneath them. When Megan returned, I signed everything without hesitation. She slid a copy of the documents into a folder and handed it to me. "Is there anything else we can help you with?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be receiving a large deposit in the next few weeks. I want to talk through some investment options." Her eyes lit up. She nodded and began pulling brochures from a drawer. By the time I left the bank, the afternoon sun had warmed the sidewalks. I stopped at the bakery on the corner and picked up a single cinnamon roll, then drove home with the windows cracked just slightly. That evening, I sat down and called Hugh again. "I'd like to move forward with selling the house," I told him, "the one at Hillgrove." He didn't sound surprised. "I'll get the paperwork started," he said, "and I'll put you in touch with someone I trust to list it." Her name was Beatrice Lockwood. She was sharp-eyed, quick-spoken, and had a no-nonsense air about her that reminded me a little of my old principal. We met at Hugh's office the next afternoon, and I handed over the keys and the deed. "We can stage the house and begin showings next week," she said. "Is the family living there aware?" "Not yet," I said. Beatrice paused, then nodded. "We'll schedule viewings for when the house is empty." "I know their routines," I told her. "Tuesdays and Thursdays are best." Later that evening, I sat on the back steps and watched the sunset. I could hear the kids from the house down the street riding their bikes, their voices carrying across the lawns. I thought of Claire at that age, pushing her training wheels across the same sidewalk, hair tangled and helmet askew. Eli used to bring me dandelions, calling them sunflowers for Grandma. That was before they stopped coming around unless they were dropped off for convenience. The next few days passed in a quiet blur. Beatrice scheduled photographs for the listing. I stayed away from the house, not ready to walk through those rooms again. She sent me the photos later that night, bright, clean shots of every corner, the kitchen gleaming, the backyard, looking just as perfect as the day we bought it. We listed it the following morning. By noon, she had 3 showings lined up. Nathan still hadn't called. At one of the viewings, a couple made a full-price offer. He was a doctor she taught at the university. Beatrice called me with the news. "They're ready to close quickly. Cash buyer." I accepted the offer without hesitation. The night before the paperwork was finalized, I packed a small bag and opened the browser on my laptop. I searched for guided tours of Italy. Walter and I had always dreamed of going. Tuscany, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. I bookmarked a few options, then pulled out my calendar and circled a date in red ink. I turned off the lights and sat down in the chair by the window. The following afternoon, I signed the sale documents at Hugh's office. The house was no longer mine, no longer Nathan's either. We'd arranged for their things to be packed and stored a letter left with the neighbors with the warehouse address. Everything handled, no drama, no confrontation. It was nearly dark by the time I returned home. I warmed up a bowl of soup, turned on the lamp by the armchair, and stared down at my phone. It buzzed once. Nathan's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. The morning after the sale went through, I stood in my kitchen stirring a pot of oatmeal while the sun poured through the window. The air outside had that light spring crispness to it, not quite warm, not quite cold. I set the spoon down and reached for the small compass keychain Eli had once given me, shaped like a star tucked inside the drawer by the phone. I turned it over in my palm, listening to the quiet click of the metal turning. The house felt still in a way that wasn't heavy, just clean. My phone buzzed again, Nathan's name on the screen. I let it ring. Then came a text. "Mom, we need to talk. It's important." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat down with my planner and made a checklist: passport, luggage, travel insurance, medication, Italian phrasebook. I circled the departure date with a red pen. That afternoon, I returned to the bank to confirm the deposit had cleared. Megan, the advisor I'd met with earlier, greeted me with a warm smile and ushered me into a small office where she walked me through the new account setup. We discussed moderate risk investments for a portion of the funds, while the rest would remain accessible for travel emergencies and day-to-day needs. "Is there anything else I can help with?" she asked as she handed me the final forms. I paused before answering. "I'd like to revise my will." Megan nodded and offered a list of estate lawyers, but I told her I already had someone, Hugh. By the time I left the bank, the breeze had picked up and clouds were drifting in from the west. I zipped up my jacket and pulled my scarf a little tighter. That evening, I made myself a cup of mint tea and opened my laptop to finalize the Italy tour. I picked a small group package with just 8 other travelers, including guided stops in Florence, Siena, and the countryside around Tuscany. The itinerary included art museums, cooking classes, and visits to local vineyards. I printed the confirmation and tucked it under the magnet on the fridge. The next morning, I met Beatrice at the storage facility to oversee the last of Nathan and Melissa's things being moved. The movers were quick and professional, boxing up clothes, toys, and dishes without comment. I stayed mostly out of the way, keeping to the edge of the garage while Beatrice reviewed the checklist. When they were finished, I handed her an envelope with the address of the neighbors next door to the old house. "Leave this with them," I said. "It's for Nathan. The storage location, a list of what was moved, and the name of the new owners." She nodded. "They'll be back from Europe when tomorrow." That night, I opened the window in the living room and listened to the wind moving through the oak tree. I hadn't heard back from Nathan since his last message, but I knew it wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Still, I felt calm. Everything that needed to be done was done. The next day passed in slow, deliberate movements. I packed my suitcase, organized travel documents, printed copies of my itinerary, and made a list of things to leave for Janine, who'd agreed to water my plants. Around 5 in the evening, the phone rang. Nathan's number. I picked up. "Mom." His voice sounded tight, urgent. "We just got back. Why aren't you answering your phone? I've been busy," I said simply. "Busy." There was a pause, then his tone sharpened. "There are people living in our house. There's nothing inside. It's all gone. What happened?" "It's in the letter I left with the neighbors," I said. "Your belongings are in storage. The new owners moved in last week." "You sold it?" His voice cracked. "I did." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You had no right. That was our home." "No," I replied. "It was my home, legally and financially. You were living there because I allowed it." "That's no longer the case." From the background, I could hear Melissa's voice rising, panicked, then angry. I didn't catch every word, but I heard my name. Nathan didn't try to soften it. "How could you do this?" he said. "We have nowhere to go." "You have 2 full-time incomes," I answered. "And you're adults. After everything you've done, after everything we've built. How can you just take it all away?" "I didn't take anything. I stopped giving." The line went quiet again. Then he said, "We're coming over." I didn't answer. I just ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw all 4 of them, Nathan, Melissa, Claire, and Eli, standing on my porch. I opened the door and waited. Nathan spoke first. "We need to talk." I stepped back just slightly. "You can come in, but only if we talk calmly." They followed me into the living room. Claire clutched her phone in one hand, arms crossed, while Melissa sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. Eli looked confused, glancing between the adults. Nathan paced. You blindsided us, Mom. We were depending on that house. I know, I said. You were, and that was the problem. Melissa folded her arms tightly. We've worked hard for everything we have. This feels like punishment. I turned toward her. It's not punishment, it's a boundary. Claire finally spoke. This is embarrassing. I can't even invite my friends over now. They all live in nice houses and we're in an apartment. I looked at her and asked gently, when was the last time you came to visit me? Not because you had to, just because you wanted to? She blinked clearly, unsure what to say. Nathan tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. I won't do this again. I won't finance a life that shuts me out. You'll find a place to live. You'll adjust. But from now on, I'm done living for other people's comfort. Melissa stood. Where are we supposed to go tonight? There's a hotel across from the post office. They have family suites. The storage unit address is in the letter. Everything's labeled. Nathan looked at me as though he didn't recognize me. You've changed. I nodded. Yes, I have. He didn't say anything else. Melissa turned sharply toward the door. Claire followed. Eli hesitated. He stepped toward me and wrapped his arms around my waist. Will you still bake cookies with me? He asked quietly. Anytime, I said, hugging him back. As they left, I stood in the doorway and watched their car drive off. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cold. I just felt like someone who had finally drawn a line and held it. Upstairs, the suitcase waited by the door. The flight to Florence was in the morning. The cab pulled into the airport just after sunrise. The sky was streaked with soft shades of pink and orange, and the air smelled like jet fuel and fresh coffee from the terminal doors. I thanked the driver, wheeled my bag to the curb, and stepped into the cool, hum-filled space of departures. It felt strange to be going somewhere with no one to wave me off, but not unpleasant. My boarding pass was tucked into the front pocket of my coat, my passport beside it. Inside the terminal, everything moved with quiet rhythm. People pulling suitcases, boarding calls over the speaker, the occasional squeal of a child tugging at a parent's hand. I followed the signs to my gate, stopping once to buy a paperback and a bottle of water. When I reached the waiting area, I took a seat by the window and watched a plane lift into the sky, its wheels folding beneath it like a promise. The flight itself was smooth. I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel tired either. I looked out the window, flipping occasionally through my book, but mostly, I just sat, letting my thoughts drift. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I took the small compass keychain Eli had given me out of my bag. I traced the edges of the charm with my thumb. When we landed in Florence, the warmth hit me the moment we stepped outside. A guide holding a sign that said, Tuscan Horizons. Welcome. Mrs. Winters met me by the baggage claim. His name was Marco, a soft-spoken man in his early 40s, with a kind smile and a folder of neatly printed itineraries. I joined the other travelers, 8 of us in total, and we rode together in a small van through the outskirts of the city toward the Old Quarter. Our hotel was tucked along a narrow street near the Arno River, the kind of place with shuttered windows and stone balconies worn in the best way. My room had a view of a courtyard with ivy crawling up the far wall and just enough space for a writing desk and a single firm bed. I unpacked slowly, placing my shoes by the door, hanging my scarf on the back of the chair. That evening, we gathered for dinner in a nearby trattoria. We sat at a long table beneath low arches, passing dishes of pasta-grilled vegetables and crusty bread. The wine was local and poured freely. I found myself seated beside a woman named Vivian from Vermont, who traveled often and always packed an extra toothbrush. Across from us were Grace and Robert, a retired couple from Oregon who spoke in soft, unhurried voices and shared their dessert without asking. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel out of place. The days that followed unfolded in gentle rhythm. Mornings began with quiet walks through sunlit piazzas or guided tours through cathedrals, museums, and markets. Afternoons were for long lunches, shaded courtyards, and drives into the countryside. In Siena, we stood in the wide shell-shaped square and listened to Marco explain the history of the Palio. In San Gimignano, we climbed the old tower and looked out over vineyards and rooftops that glowed gold in the late light. Each night, I returned to my room with tired feet and a full heart. I wrote postcards to Janine and Eli, tucked a pressed flower into the back of my journal, and circled places on the map that I wanted to return to someday. I took pictures not of myself, but of doorways, fountains, and quiet corners I didn't want to forget. One night, in Montepulciano, after a meal of gnocchi and roasted chicken, we sat outside beneath a trellis of grapevines. A soft breeze carried the scent of basil and earth. Vivian asked me what brought me on the trip. I hesitated for a moment, then told them everything. About Walter, about the house, about the text message that started it all. There was a long pause after I finished. Robert leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table. "You were right to do what you did," he said. "People forget that giving can only go so far before it becomes something else." Grace reached across the table and touched my hand. Sometimes we don't know how heavy something is until we finally put it down. Vivian nodded. It takes strength to let go, especially when it's your own family. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Their quiet affirmations settled over me like a blanket. As the night wore on, we lingered under the vines, listening to the distant hum of laughter from another table, the clink of glasses, the occasional chirp of insects in the grass. I closed my eyes for a moment and just listened, feeling the stillness sink in. The following days passed quickly. We toured vineyards in Chianti, tasted olive oil on fresh bread, and spent a quiet afternoon wandering through a sculpture garden tucked behind a crumbling villa. Each moment felt like a piece of something I hadn't realized I was missing. One morning, Marco surprised us with a detour to a small hilltop town not listed in the brochure. "This one is just for Joy," he said with a wink. When the final evening arrived, we met for dinner at a small family-owned restaurant at the edge of the town square. Marco thanked us for our kindness, our good spirits, our curiosity. We toasted with a final glass of wine, took photos, and exchanged email addresses we might never use. Vivian slipped a tiny wrapped chocolate into my hand before saying goodbye. Later that night, back in my room, I packed slowly. I left space in my bag for a small bottle of olive oil and a wrapped tin of biscotti I planned to give Eli. I placed the compass keychain on top where I could find it easily. Then I sat by the window one last time, looking out over the roofs and the still, quiet courtyard below. Tomorrow, I would return to Purcellville. I didn't know what waited for me at home or how Nathan might act next. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of whatever was coming. The weight I used to carry of obligation of guilt was no longer mine to hold. The plane touched down just after noon. The sky over Virginia was thick with clouds, and the air had that heavy, still feeling of late summer. I rode home in silence, the cab winding through the familiar streets of Purcellville. The hills looked greener than I remembered, and the trees swayed softly in the wind. When we pulled up in front of the house, everything was just as I had left it, quiet, clean, and still. I set my suitcase inside the front door and stood for a moment in the entryway. The old grandfather clock ticked softly in the hall, and a faint scent of lavender still lingered from the sachets I'd tucked into the linens. I unpacked slowly, placing the small souvenirs I'd brought home from Italy on the kitchen counter. A bottle of olive oil, a wrapped tin of almond cookies, a pressed lavender bundle I'd picked up in San Gimignano. I placed Eli's compass gently back into the dish by the door. I had just finished putting away the last of my clothes when the phone rang. The sound startled me. I hesitated, then picked it up. The number was familiar. Mom Nathan's voice was tight, impatient. "You're back." "Yes," I said. "I got in about an hour ago." There was a pause. "We need to talk," he said. "Can we come by?" "Not tonight," I said without hesitation. "Tomorrow, 2:00. Another pause, longer this time. "Fine," he said. The line went dead. The next day, I baked oatmeal cookies in the morning. Eli had always loved them. I tidied up the living room, set out a pitcher of water, and waited. Right on time, the doorbell rang. Nathan was standing there with his wife Rachel and both children. Eli rushed forward with a grin and hugged me without a word. Pearl lingered by the porch, scrolling on her phone, her face unreadable. I stepped aside and let them in. We sat in the living room, the same space where we'd once played board games and opened Christmas presents. Now it felt like a waiting room. "You look well," Rachel said stiffly. "Thank you," I replied. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We've had a really hard time," he began. "The apartment is small, the neighborhood's not great. Rachel's had to cut her hours at the studio." "I understand," I said. "But you both still have jobs, and you're healthy." He nodded slowly, as if trying to figure out what to say next. "We were hoping," he said carefully, "that now you're back, maybe things could go back to the way they were." I met his eyes. "What way was that exactly?" Nathan hesitated. Rachel reached over and squeezed his arm. "We just want to be a family again," he said. I kept my voice steady. "I never stopped being your mother. But I won't go back to paying for your life. I won't be your bank." Pearl looked up from her phone, then her face flushing slightly. "We're not asking for everything," Nathan said quickly. "Just a little help while we get back on our feet." I shook my head. "I've made some changes. The money from the house is invested now. I've set aside what I need for travel health and giving where it's needed. I'm not funding a lifestyle anymore." There was a beat of silence. Then Rachel spoke. "You've changed." "I have," I said, "and I'm not ashamed of that." Pearl shifted in her seat. "I didn't realize we hurt you so much." I turned toward her. "You didn't do it alone, but I want to be part of your life if you want me there. Not as someone you turn to when you need something. Just me." Pearl nodded slowly. Eli reached for another cookie. Rachel stood. "Well, I guess that's that." Nathan stayed seated a moment longer. His face was unreadable. "You're really not going to help us?" "I will," I said gently, "if you're ever in true need. But what you're facing now, that's just life. And you can handle it." They left not long after. Pearl gave me a soft, "See you later," as she stepped outside. Eli looked up at me. "Can I come back sometime, just to visit?" "Anytime," I said, hugging him close. "This door is always open to you." That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. A breeze moved through the branches, and the wind chimes clinked together in soft tones. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of a new kind of peace. Not the peace of pleasing others, but the kind that comes when you choose your own way forward. A few days after their visit, I found a note in the mailbox. The handwriting was careful, the envelope plain. Inside, folded neatly, was a card from Pearl. She had written that she was sorry for the way she had acted, that she hadn't understood everything until now, and that she hoped to come over again soon, just to visit. I sat at the kitchen table holding the card for a long while. No request for anything. No mention of money or help. Just a quiet apology. That small gesture meant more than any grand declaration could have. The following weekend, Orion showed up on his bike. His helmet was slightly askew, and his backpack was bouncing against his shoulders. I was in the front yard trimming the roses when I spotted him coming down the street. He waved as he came to a stop. "Grandma, can I hang out here for a bit?" he asked, already unzipping his backpack to reveal a chessboard and a box of cookies. I brought snacks this time. We played for over an hour at the kitchen table. He talked about school, a field trip he was looking forward to, and a comic book he was writing. When he left, I gave him a slice of banana bread for the road and reminded him to wear his helmet properly. Later that evening, Nathan called. His voice was subdued. "Pearl told me she wrote to you," he said. "She did?" I answered. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "I think this has all made her think." I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. "Mom," he continued, "I've been thinking too, about everything. The house, what I said, what I didn't say." "Go on," I said, soft but firm. "I don't know if I can undo it," he said, "but I'd like to try." That was the first time I heard something close to real regret in his voice. Not manipulation, not persuasion, just a man trying to mend something he finally realized he had broken. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became more frequent, though never long. Rachel remained distant but polite. She sent me an email about Pearl's upcoming choir recital and mentioned they'd saved a seat for me if I wanted to come. I hadn't been invited to anything like that in years. At the recital, I sat near the back of the auditorium, not wanting to make a scene or seem like I expected anything. When Pearl stepped onto the stage with her classmates, she spotted me. Her face lit up in a way that caught me off guard. After the performance, she ran up and hugged me before I could even stand. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. "You invited me," I said. "That's all I needed." Nathan and Rachel approached more slowly. Rachel looked tired, her face drawn, but she nodded in greeting. Nathan offered to walk me to my car, and I let him. The evening air was cool and the gravel crunched under our feet as we crossed the parking lot. "I know it's going to take time," he said quietly. "But thank you for showing up. For her." I unlocked the car door. "You're her parents. She learns how to treat people from you." He nodded. "I know." I watched them from the car as they got into their own vehicle, Pearl still chattering from the excitement of the stage. It wasn't a perfect scene, but it was real. Back at home, I opened my travel planner again. I'd been thinking about going to the Southwest in the fall. A train tour, perhaps. Something quiet. Maybe even the Grand Canyon, a place Randall always wanted to see. The next morning, Orion showed up again. This time, he had a folder with a school project he was proud of and wanted to show me. I made sandwiches and lemonade, and we sat on the porch while he explained every detail. At one point, he stopped mid-sentence. "Do you think Dad's really trying?" he asked, fidgeting with the edge of the folder. I looked at him. Trying is something you don't do once. It's something you do every day. He nodded, eyes lowered. "I think he wants to, but it's hard for him." "It's hard for a lot of people," I said. "But when you care, you keep showing up anyway." That night, I received a second card in the mail. This one was from Rachel. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she said she was trying to be better, that she appreciated me coming to the recital and hoped we could start over slowly. She included a picture of the kids from the school program and signed it from Rachel. I placed both cards on the side table in the living room next to the compass keychain Orion had given me. They were small things, but they marked something important. A shift, an opening. It wasn't all fixed, and it might never be the way it once was, but something honest was beginning to grow again, no longer tangled in obligation or money, just connection. And I wasn't afraid of how long it might take. I'd already waited years to be seen again as more than a wallet. Now they were seeing me, bit by bit. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. I kept my door open, the porch light on, and the kettle filled just in case someone decided to stop by. Orion visited often, sometimes with Pearl in tow. She would bring a drawing or a cookie, and Orion would tease her until she grinned. Nathan called every few days just to check in, though the conversations were short. He never once mentioned the house, the will, or the hurtful things that had happened. It was as if we'd quietly agreed that starting over meant leaving some words unspoken. One Sunday, Rachel knocked on my door with a small pot of marigolds and a careful smile. She apologized for all the ways she had looked past me and asked if I'd like help planting flowers in the garden. We worked side by side, hands deep in the soil, not saying much, but sharing the quiet comfort of forgiveness. Pearl chased Orion around the yard, their laughter floating up through the warm air. For the first time in years, I felt the old steadiness return, a sense that home was not a house, but the people willing to return to you again and again. As summer faded into fall, I found myself letting go of old disappointments. I stopped waiting for a perfect apology or a dramatic gesture. What I received instead was something far better: simple, everyday kindness. Rachel dropping off homemade soup, Nathan stopping by on his way home from work just to ask if I needed anything at the store, Orion and Pearl arguing over who got the last slice of pie at Thanksgiving, then deciding to split it after all. I realized that justice didn't always come as a grand reckoning. Sometimes it arrived quietly in small moments that stitched the family back together, one honest act at a time. I still kept Randall's compass on the side table. Now, though, it reminded me not of all I'd lost, but of the direction I'd chosen for myself toward patience, boundaries, and gentle hope. There were no guarantees, but there was peace in knowing I'd stood my ground without closing my heart. If you've ever found yourself questioning your place in your own family, or if you've wondered if quiet strength is enough, let me tell you, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply keep the light on. That's what brings people home in the end. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own journey or reflections in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join me again soon.